Chapter 19. The Meeting. As the door slammed after the departing admiral, Lord Julian turned to Arabella and actually smiled. He felt that he was doing better, and gathered from it an almost childish satisfaction. Childish in all the circumstances. "Decidedly, I think I had the last word there," he said, with a toss of his golden ringlets. Miss Bishop, seated at the cabin table, looked at him steadily, without returning his smile. "Does it matter, then, so much, having the last word? I am thinking of those poor fellows on the Royal Mary. Many of them have had their last word indeed. And for what? A fine ship sunk, a score of lives lost, thrice that number now in jeopardy, and all for what?" "You are overwrought, ma'am. Overwrought?" She uttered a single sharp note of laughter. "I assure you I am calm. I am asking you a question, Lord Julian. Why has this Spaniard done all this? To what purpose?" "You heard him." Lord Julian shrugged angrily. "Bloodlust," he explained shortly. "Bloodlust?" she asked. She was amazed. "Does such a thing exist, then? It's insane. Monstrous." "Fiendish," his lordship agreed. "Devil's work." "I don't understand. At Bridgetown 3 years ago there was a Spanish raid, and things were done that should have been impossible to men. Horrible, revolting things which strain belief, which seem, when I think of them now, like the illusions of some evil dream. Are men just beasts?" "Men?" said Lord Julian, staring. "Say Spaniards, and I'll agree." He was an Englishman speaking of hereditary foes, and yet there was a measure of truth in what he said. "This is the Spanish way in the New World. Faith, almost it justifies such men as Blood of what they do." She shivered, as if cold, and setting her elbows on the table, she took her chin in her hands, and sat staring before her. Observing her, his lordship noticed how drawn and white her face had grown. There was reason enough for that, and for worse. Not any other woman of his acquaintance would have preserved her self-control in such an ordeal, and fear, at least, at no time had Miss Bishop shown any sign. It is impossible that he did not find her admirable. A Spanish steward entered bearing a silver chocolate service and a box of Peruvian candies, which he placed on the table before the lady. "With the Admiral's homage," he said, then bowed and withdrew. Miss Bishop took no heed of him or his offering, but continued to stare before her, lost in thought. Lord Julian took a turn in the long, low cabin, which was lighted by a skylight above and great square windows astern. It was luxuriously appointed. There were rich Eastern rugs on the floor, well-filled bookcases stood against the bulkheads, and there was a carved walnut sideboard laden with silverware. On a long, low chest, standing under the middle stern port, lay a guitar that was gay with ribbons. Lord Julian picked it up, twanged the strings once as if moved by nervous irritation, and put it down. He turned again to face Miss Bishop. "I came out here," he said, "to put down piracy, but, blister me, I begin to think that the French are right in desiring piracy to continue as a curb upon these Spanish scoundrels." He was to be strongly confirmed in that opinion before many hours were past. Meanwhile, their treatment at the hands of Don Miguel was considerate and courteous. It confirmed the opinion, contemptuously expressed to his lordship by Miss Bishop, that since they were to be held to ransom, they need not fear any violence or hurt. A cabin was placed at the disposal of the lady and her terrified woman, and another at Lord Julian's. They were given the freedom of the ship, and bidden to dine at the Admiral's table, nor were his further intentions regarding them mentioned, nor yet his immediate destination. The Milagrosa, with her consort the Hildaga, rolling after her, steered a south by westerly course, then veering to the southeast round Cape Tiburoff, and thereafter standing well out to sea, with the land no more than a cloudy outline to larboard. She headed directly east, and so ran straight into the arms of Captain Blood, who was making for the Windward Passage, as we know. That happened early on the following morning, After having systematically hunted his enemy in vain for a year, Don Miguel chanced upon him in this unexpected and entirely fortuitous fashion. But that is the ironic way of fortune. It was also the way of fortune that Don Miguel should thus come upon the Arabella at a time when, separated from the rest of the fleet, she was alone and at a disadvantage. It looked to Don Miguel as if the luck with which had so long been on Blood's side had at last veered in his own favour. Miss Bishop, newly risen, had come out to take the air on the quarter-deck with his lordship in attendance, as you would expect of so gallant a gentleman, when she beheld the big red ship that had once been the Cinco Llagas out of Cadiz. The vessel was bearing down upon them, her mountains of snowy canvas bellying forward, the long pennon with the cross of St. George fluttering from her main trunk in the morning breeze, the gilded portholes in her red hull, and the gilded beak-head aflash in the morning sun. Miss Bishop was not to recognize this for that same Cinco Llagas, which she had seen once before on a tragic day in Barbados 3 years ago. To her it was just a great ship that was heading resolutely, majestically towards them, and an Englishman, to judge by the pennon she was flying. The sight thrilled her curiously. It awoke in her an uplifting sense of pride that took no account of the danger to herself in the encounter that must now be inevitable. Beside her on the poop, whether they had climbed to obtain a better view and equally arrested at a gaze, stood Lord Julian. But he shared none of her exultation. He had been in his first sea fight yesterday, and he felt that the experience would suffice him for a very considerable time. This, I insist, is no reflection upon his courage. "Look," said Miss Bishop, pointing, and to his infinite amazement he observed that her eyes were sparkling. Did she realize, he wondered, what was afoot? Her next sentence resolved his doubt. "She is English, and she comes resolutely on. She means to fight." "God help her, then," said his lordship, gloomily. "Her captain must be mad. What can he hope to do against 2 such heavy hulks as these? If these could so easily blow the Royal Mary out of the water, what will they do with this vessel? Look at that devil, Don Miguel. He's utterly disgusting in his glee." From the quarter-deck, where he moved amid the frenzy of preparation, the Admiral had turned to flash a backward glance at his prisoners. His eyes were alight, his face transfigured. He flung out an arm to point to the advancing ship, and bawled something in Spanish that was lost to them in the noise of the labouring crew. They advanced to the poop-rail, and watched the bustle. Telescope in hand on the quarter-deck, Don Miguel was issuing his orders. Already the gunners were kindling their matches. Sailors were aloft, taking in sail. Others were spreading a stout rope net above the waist as a protection against falling spars. And meanwhile Don Miguel had been signalling to his consort, in response to which the Hidalga had drawn steadily forward until she was now a beam of the Milagrosa, half a cable's length to starboard. And from the height of the tall poop my lord and Miss Bishop could see her own bustle of preparation. And they could discern signs of it now aboard the advancing English ship as well. She was furling tops and mainsails, stripping in fact to mizzen and sprit for the coming action. Thus, almost silently, without challenge or exchange of signals, had action been mutually determined. Of necessity now, under diminished sail, the advance of the Arabella was slower, but it was none the less steady. She was already within saker shot, and they could make out the figures stirring on her forecastle and the brass guns gleaming on her prow. The gunners of the Milagrosa raised their linstocks and blew upon their smouldering matches, looking up impatiently at the Admiral. But the Admiral solemnly shook his head. "Patience!" he exhorted them. "Save your fire until we have him. He is coming straight to his doom, straight into the yard-arm and the rope that have been so long waiting for him." "Stab me," said the lordship. "This Englishman may be gallant enough to accept battle against such odds, but there are times when discretion is better quality than gallantry in a commander." "Gallantry often wins through, even against overwhelming strength," said Miss Bishop. He looked at her, and noted in her bearing only excitement. Of fear he could still discern no trace. His lordship was past amazement. She was not by any means the kind of woman to which life had accustomed him. "Presently," he said, "you will suffer me to place you under cover." I can see best from here, she answered him, and quietly added, I'm praying for this Englishman. He must be very brave. Under his breath, Lord Julian damned the fellow's bravery.